Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual breakfast sessions. My name is Larry Sashin, and we've got a great panel for us today to discuss. Forget about Plan B. Do you really have a Plan A? Now, during the pandemic, we were all told we need a Plan B. Well, if you ask people right now, they will say to you, oh, yeah, I've got a Plan B. But what's their Plan A? Do they have a business plan? Is it written down? Because without it being written down and updated, it's just a bunch of ideas. So before we go into the talk, let's go around the room and tell everybody who we are. Diane, why don't you start?
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is well and safe today. My name is Diane Giordano. I'm a tax partner at Markham LLP. My office is in Melville, New York, but I have, the firm has several offices. I specialize in business consulting, and I look forward to answering questions and sharing some information with everyone who's participating.
Great. Thanks, Diane. Joe.
Good morning. My name is Joe McClellan. I'm a hospitality and corporate attorney with Green Spoon Mortar. I'm based out of their New York office. We're a national law firm. I practice out of New Jersey, New York, and Miami, representing bars, nightclubs, hotels, and alcohol brands.
Okay. Mike.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Ganzel. My company is Voice of Reason Consulting. I am a strategic advisor to small and medium-sized businesses focusing on revenue growth.
Okay, and Fred.
Good morning. I'm Fred Clashman. I'm the editor and publisher of Total Food Service. We cover the restaurant and food service industry in Metro New York and across the country.
And like I said before, I'm the not quite awake Larry Sashin. And let's get into the topic. Oh, and before I get into that, please, audience, keep yourselves muted unless you're called on. Fred, we've been talking about Plan A's and Plan B's, and we met with somebody who had no written business plan, and has an extremely successful business, but it's not something that would be recommended. Mike, tell the people, what you've told me about it, any business plan, if it's not written down, it's what?
It doesn't exist.
So
yes, I remember that. We've had many conversations, Larry.
Yes.
But in particular, this one, yes, I think the question is, tell me again the question, Larry. It's early in the morning too.
Yes. Tell about writing a business plan. Why is it important? Why is it important, and why is it important that it's updated?
Well, if it isn't written down, the first thing is it doesn't exist. It's just part of your imagination. And if it's part of your imagination and it isn't written down, it can change every single day. So you don't know where you're going. You just wake up, say, oh, I'm going to do it this way, do it that way. Next morning you wake up, oh, I'm going to do it this way. It just continues to evolve, and it never allows you to go in any one direction.
Okay. Joe, you have a lot of businesses that come to you at the very beginning and while they're formulating their business. And what do you suggest to them?
I consider the business plan like your corporate resume. So it's your first impression to your partners, your landlord, your investors, your attorney, letting them know how serious you are about your own business and that you have a path forward, at least a guide to where you want to be. And it helps extremely by having a business plan written down.
Okay, and Mike, or
the other thing is too, just to jump in.
jump in.
Everybody has to pay the rent every month. Everybody has to pay their employees on Friday or every other Friday, et cetera. I mean, right away, you've set ground rules for reporting of some type that you're responsible for, et cetera. You could make an argument that that's the beginning of a business plan all by itself. Is how do I fulfill those obligations on a daily and weekly basis?
Yeah. Mike, or anybody in the panel, what are the parts of a business plan? A good business plan?
Oh, well, I have a whole sheet here of what's in a good business plan.
Break it down into five topics.
Well, first thing, I guess, is we could probably put together an executive summary and a company summary. So here you're going to talk about what your objectives are, what your mission is, what are the keys to success, who owns the company, and what is the company history. So that would be one, where we take executive summary and a company summary together. Then we will talk about services. So, what are the services you provide? What is your you want to analyze the market, what percentage of the market you want, what part of the market are you aiming for, who's your target, what are the services you're going to provide. Then I guess you'd want to talk about your strategy and how you're going to implement things. So that's would be probably, say, the third or the fourth. And that would be what's your competitive edge, what's your marketing strategy, what's your sales strategy, what are your sales forecasts, what are your milestones, okay? And then I guess you talk about your management. What, who are the people that are in your company? What are they going to do? And then lastly, which is certainly in Diane's and Diane and Joe's, is the financial plan. So what are the assumptions you're making? What's your break even? What are the revenues you're going to project? What's your profit and loss? What's your cash flow? What's your balance sheet going to look like? Basically, what are your financial plan? I guess, how's that? Is that
Thank you. That covers it. And by the way, thanks for the segue to Diane. Diane, how does an accountant, an accounting firm get involved in designing a business plan?
Well, we would meet with the business owner and understand what their goals are, very similar to what Michael just said. Then we'd understand who are the investors and what the plans of the company are. And from understanding who the investors are, we could assist the company on choosing a form of business, whether or not it would be a personal owned business or an incorporation, an LLC, a partnership. There are various different types of corporations. What type of business entity is going to work best for this initial plan? Yes, it could change down the road. You could start off with an LLC, and then later on, when the business gets bigger, you convert to a different type of corporation. All of that is very viable, but you should really understand what those issues and opportunities are. For example, I have just recently signed on a client, and they originally operated as a partnership. The partnership broke up, and then they converted to an S corporation. The business grew. It's growing nicely, several $1 million a year. It's somewhat of a consulting business. It's growing nicely, and she now owns an S corporation. She wants to provide stock to the employees, and you really can't do that in an S corporation. So what she had to do is reincorporate as a C corporation in Delaware and merge the S corporation out of existence. That probably was not thought of in advance. Maybe if a couple of years ago she said, I'm going to have employees and I want to compensate them with stock, we could have avoided all these different type of structures. So I think that yes, she's asking for advice now, but that's something you should keep in mind, choice of entity and so on. In addition, I want to just use the same new client as an example. She wants to use cash basis. After 2017, the use of cash basis accounting is much more broad and probably works for startup smaller businesses. So the old company is an accrual basis, and now she wants to use cash basis. You have to understand what the difference is between accrual basis and cash basis. What's going to work for you? What's going to work for your investors? Who are your investors going to be? Just keep some of these items in mind.
And just to jump in there too, it's key to understand who your investors are. Are they friends and family? Are they institutional? That goes into then disclosure requirements and SEC regulations, and whether you're providing securities and different disclosure and legal statements that you'd want to include in your business plan or as you're out pitching investors. So it's something to be cautious of from the beginning, and whether you want to see yourself going out and raising funds on a bigger level rather than sort of a small standalone business.
You know, Mike brought up something before that I want to pull us back to. He said, if you don't have a business plan, the things change every day. Okay. Well, whether you have a business plan or not, change every day.
It's
So
changing.
how often should you go back and take a look at your business plan?
Well,
Anyone?
the business plan is not something that is set in stone. It's a business plan that continues to evolve as businesses continue to evolve. And so let's just say this, every quarter, one should take a look at the business, see what's going on, what you've done, what can you do better, what you do differently, etc. So every quarter you look at your results. It's not a bad time to also look at your business plan and see if you're on target. So particularly looking at milestones, if you set milestones, particularly to look at see if your mission or your objectives are being met. So the problem, the balance, there's a balance in running a small business, and that is the transactional side of the business versus the strategic side of the business. Often enough, you get so caught up in the transactional side of the business, you forget about the strategic side. So I would say that at least twice a year, look at that business plan. But if you can look at it quarterly, that's really a good thing to do.
Yeah. Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
In addition to internal review of documents, keep in mind that there are law changes. I'm not just referring to tax law changes. It could be other legal law changes that may affect your business. Filing requirements, registration requirements, rate changes, all that needs to be taken into account when it happens.
And even if you're opening a bar or restaurant without a business plan, it's almost impossible in New York. I mean, it's all those details that Michael stated, that he listed out here as well, are required in your application to your community board, to the state liquor authority. They want to know everything from who's the management, who's in charge, who's the chef, what does your menu look like, what does your floor plan look like, tables, seats, what hours are you open, whether you are dancing, nightclub, all those key elements that are listed out and, what you want to be are vital to your application process. And without it, you can't even, get a liquor license if you're looking to open a bar or restaurant in New York.
Okay. Let's dial this back to the business who did have a rich uncle.
Let's go back to a step and talk a little bit about, we talked about how Plan A turned into Plan B over the course of the pandemic. And in most cases, that was a move for people who had never been in takeout and delivery before to go into takeout and delivery. I'm curious to get your thoughts on whether takeout and delivery will continue to be something that people will embrace as part of their business plan, or are they moving back to more traditional service based on the fact that their customers have now returned to in-restaurant dining? Any thoughts on that?
You want to take that, Diane?
Well, this is just for me personally, because I go out to eat a lot.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to see people in restaurants. I like the idea that people go out and restaurants can employ people and stay in business. But I also see that when I do go to restaurants, I see people waiting to take their food out. I think it's just a lifestyle that we've gotten used to. I don't know if it's generational or just people still have fear of a pandemic. But I do think that takeout and delivery is very much here to stay. I think my children who are college age and right out of college age, they're very used to having food delivered, despite the fact that I go grocery shopping every week. And I don't see that changing. Like I said, this could be generational. I'm not speaking from as a food expert. I'm just speaking as an observer.
Right.
I like seeing restaurants busy, but I also see the convenience of having food delivered and eating whatever and whenever you want.
I think it's extremely important. It's been a whole nother revenue stream for restaurants. I think one thing though is cost of those delivery services and taking that into account. That's been a big issue of the, I won't name the names of the delivery apps that are starting to charge a pretty high fee, and restaurants wanting to own their own customers or offer some type of in dining experience that tries to bring those customers back in. But I believe definitely it's here to stay. And even I'm sure a client of mine actually is in the audience who ran a successful bar and restaurant in various states during the pandemic, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, might be able to give some context on what his thoughts.
Yes,
Great.
Cole. Cole,
Hello.
tell everybody who you are.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cole Bernard. I'm one of the partners at Branded Hospitality Group. We have a few brands under our umbrella, ranging in New York City, Chicago, Montauk, New York, Delray, Florida, which will be opening one of our concepts in Q3, Q4 of 2023, as well as other various concepts in Manhattan. To delivery services. Yeah, I think Joe kind of nailed it right on its head. Every venue wants, and restaurant and concept wants these additional revenue streams. But at the end of the day, when you see your statements of what the fees are being charged for these services, you can't really afford to miss out on the opportunity of the additional revenue. But at the end of the day, once the net income comes along downstream, there's not really much left for the restaurants after the fees. It's very minimal. But at the end of the day, like Joe had mentioned, it's definitely a model that is here to stay for the long haul.
So Cole, could you see yourself doing your own delivery?
Doing your own delivery comes with a few different things. One, having the proper insurance for it, in case, use the example, you have a busboy who acts as a dual role as a busboy and delivery boy, and accident happens, you have to have the proper insurance for it. So at the end of the day, I think depending on the concept and how much volume and demand is really there, as well as what part of the city, for example, depending where in the city where we are, if there's a lot of residential or if there's a lot of commercial left or so on and so forth. So depending on where each location is and what brand.
Were you in the delivery business prior to the pandemic, or did
Yep.
you go into? Okay, you were. Okay.
We were on everything from Grubhub to Seamless to in-house. We did it all. This is in regards to one of our concepts that has been in Manhattan going on for 13 years now. It's a brand called Bounce Sporting Club, successful bar and restaurant in Manhattan. We were doing it pre-pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic, not seeing ourselves doing it as much because, like Joe had said, the fees are just so high. And we will probably shift it, now that we're expanding our hours, probably do it more in-house ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But actually circling back when Cole and his team came up with their concept and they put together a very good business plan, delivery was one of those items in the plan and on their financial model. So that was, a key component when they were doing their numbers, that they had a focus on making sure that they were, delivering. And that's also part of when we apply to the community board, that community benefit, when you're, explaining why they should approve this business, it's that community outreach, and that benefit to the community was delivery services to the neighborhood.
So as we look at, Larry, you back?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Good. Welcome back.
Okay, thanks.
So another question is, if we assume that plan A at some point was just having a delivery business and having customers come into your restaurant, and then plan B became a delivery and takeout focus, then where is this new plan A and how does that define and what is this new plan B? And what does it look like given things like a $17 an hour dishwasher, a $24 an hour delivery person? Where are we going as we redefine what this plan B is going to be?
Was that
Diane,
good?
or anybody answer that
Yeah.
question.
I'm happy to throw out a quick statement on that one for sure. You kind of nailed it on the head, and I think it's back to the overall like Michael had mentioned in the beginning of the call, is that your business plan is constantly evolving, and I think that now coming out of the pandemic and seeing what the reality is, or what the new normal should be, I guess, right? Using New York City as an example, I grew up in Manhattan and Long Island pretty much my whole life. I live on the East Side. Midtown Manhattan on the East Side is not what it used to be after 4 o'clock. Even, the bars for happy hour, even Staples, oyster bars and Staples that have been on the East Side forever, their happy hours are not what they used to be. And I think it kind of shifts back to the whole conversation of, what the plan B is now coming out of the pandemic, because you can do the same work for a bar and restaurant and work twice as hard and get paid the same amount of money at somewhere like McDonald's and do half the work. So finding staff is it's hard. So that it all kind of falls into play now, where it used, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it wasn't as difficult. So I think it's an overall outlook now where you have to say, okay, was it costing me from open to close to employ, someone as a delivery boy, or what is it going to cost me to just outsource it on these services? So I think it's an outlook to see if the demand is there, from if you're a concept that caters to more of a lunch business and dinner business, or if you're a concept that is in a more commercial neighborhood and you're really catering to after work. There's a million different things and variables that kind of fall into play now that you really didn't think about, because Manhattan was a lot busier than what it is now, and depending where you are.
So if I
Okay,
might, I want to just generalize a little bit of what Cole is saying, and also to answer your plan A versus plan B. There's an interim step, and that's called a SWOT. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if you're obviously you've had a plan, life changes, business thing changes, everything changes around you. What do? You're going to throw out that business plan. You're going to write a new business plan. Take that interim step. Really sit down with either internally or somebody externally and do what we call a SWOT. Look at your strengths. Re-examine what the strengths of your business are. That's really internal. Look at what your weaknesses are. That's another internal. Okay. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right people in the right seat? Do you everything relative to, you've looked at all your strengths. Now you've looked at all your weaknesses. Now you look at the opportunities. What's going on in the market? What are the opportunities you can take advantage of? Do you have, the appropriate insurance? Should you engage Grubhub and so on and so forth, or should you use your own resources? So now you're looking at, what are the opportunities you can do? Should you change your menu? Should you change the food? Should, all those kinds of things. Should you change whatever alcohol you offer, et cetera? And then threats. Who's your competition? What are your threats? What are the regulations you have to deal with? What are the employment issues? So on and so forth. You take a real close, hard look doing that SWOT. Now you have an opportunity to really change your business plan and really start to do that. So that's an interim step of taking a look at that. I think Rob had mentioned that in the chat earlier, but that's one of the things I specialize in. So glad that he mentioned it, and think this is really that interim step between plan A and plan B.
Okay. Mike, how often should that happen?
At least twice a year. By the way, I see that Rob agrees with me. Once or twice a year for a SWAT is good.
I think that really ties into Diane's field in terms of, it comes down to the financials, right? Like what's working, what's not, and being in tune with good bookkeeping and accounting records. I'm sure you'll agree, Diane.
I think that's, again, I'm very concerned with changes in the law. And, someone just brought up about competition. If we're talking about some sort of food or restaurant business, you may have to revise your plan depending on who opens up down the street. Especially in the city where everything is within walking distance. We never had competition before.
So let's backtrack a little. And when you do this process, Mike, with the SWOT, how often, the SWOT too changes. We used to do them in the Strategic Advisory Board. We used to do a continuous SWOT with people. How often do you suggest that they look at that SWOT and see where they are? Because a SWOT is not static either. Once you name a problem, a threat, and if you worked on the threat, when do you say, let's move on to the next thing?
Well, let's just put it this way. Every quarter, one should be taking a very close, hard look at your business. Look at that P&L. Really, that's one of the first things to take a look at. Look at that P&L. Break that P&L down. Look at where your revenue is coming from. Look at what your expenses are, and that often enough will tell you what your strengths and weaknesses are. Quite frankly, so you take a close, hard look at that P&L every quarter. You sit down with your leadership team every quarter, and you basically say, "Hey guys, what worked? What didn't work?" So on and so forth. So in a sense, you have this mini SWOT every quarter because you're looking at your P&L. Most business people, unfortunately, don't really look at it. They leave it to their accountant. They leave it to their financial advisor. But that is, I think, one of the most important tools in running a business is because what's happening. And the most important thing about that P&L is that it's current. So if you look at it every month, not just every quarter, then you can start making adjustments. Because I think the key in business is being nimble enough to really make the changes when you need to make the changes. Stay with your strat. It's always a balance. Do you stay with your strategy? Do you change your strategy? But as much as you're on top of your business, that will be your answer.
Yes, and you also mentioned something. Meet with your advisor. In law, and I've heard this, on TV all the time. Someone who represents themselves in court has a fool for an attorney. The same goes for the SWOT. A SWOT comes out differently when you do it, or it's done with an advisor who has that 10-yard above look down at you, is not emotionally attached to your business, can tell you that Uncle Fred is a drag to your business and you must do something, whether either train him or sever. These things are all important. Joe, what do you advise your clients on something like this? How often things should be done and why it should be done with someone like you or Diane or Mike?
It's definitely important to consult with an advisor as you're doing your SWOT analysis and reviewing with leadership on what your goals are and how you're going to either adjust or pivot or move forward. Because like Diane was saying, there's laws that come into play, whether your, for example, lease allows you to change the name of your restaurant or business or your concept and may prevent you from doing a certain type of venue in a space. Or when it comes to alcohol, there's Tide House, which restrict different tiers of getting into, like a restaurant owner can also own an alcohol brand. And there's constantly things that, although they're good ideas, there's laws preventing them from allowing you to do them. Doesn't mean we can't figure out ways that we can get to yes or get to similar concepts. And working together, Cole and his group, we probably talk weekly because they have new ideas and concepts they'd like to achieve. And we're always looking into how they can best get there and be profitable.
Now, that leads me into the next question I was going to ask. Cole, please unmute yourself. Cole, so how many entities are in your hospitality group?
So we have Bounce Sporting Club, which has locations in New York, Chicago, Montauk, soon to be Delray Beach, Florida. We have My Zone Clothes, which is in Soho, New York. So that is 5. Liquor Box, another nightclub in Chicago. That's 6. Joe, did I?
Well, the corporate entity is probably a little, the family tree is a little deeper than that, but from a concept standpoint, those are the active concepts, and
Yeah.
probably has about 4 business plans in the
Okay.
pipeline and some other,
That
on some
is the
other
thing. If you're
Right.
running more than one entity, you can't have one business plan to run all of them. How often do you, well, when do you do a corporate review of all these, or do you do it individually?
Individually. So every single city, let's take Bounce for an example. Bounce, New York, we opened up in September 2011. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 2011. We opened up our Chicago location in 2017, and the business models were similar in certain ways, but different, right? The business model in Chicago changed as we signed our lease. 5 months into the development of and build out of the project, we ended up purchasing the building. So every city that we do our projects, they kind of vary depending on the concept.
and the market. I mean, what they thought, what worked really well in New York and thought might have worked equally as well in Chicago, you realize there's different demographics, there's different climate changes, there's impact from sports, whether the teams are locally or good, how COVID rebounds in those cities, crime, they all play a factor into each operation, I would
On
say.
top of that, you have to also look back to what Diane said. The tax laws are different in each location. So if you have one for many, you're in trouble. How often do you, I mean, Joe, you coordinate these things. How often do you, well, you must do this regularly with the tax laws and everything else that goes along with it. Diane, you can pipe in on this also.
I'm most concerned with proper registration. The last thing that any business owner wants is open up a new location and they don't properly register. And unfortunately, 50 states, you have 50 different rules. What do you have to register for? Do you have to register for sales tax, income tax? Some states, they're all just one registration. You do it online. Other states, you have to go to the Secretary of State. You have to do this online. You have to do this by paper. And that makes it's very difficult for business owners, because I see it when we have international business owners. They think the United States, one law. Well, it's not one law. Federal law is completely different from doing business in New York City than it would be in Iowa. So that is something that really scares me. Where are you doing business? And are you properly registering? Because I have a client is a beer distributor, and they just got notification from Missouri that their certificate of good standing was terminated because they didn't refile on an annual basis. And that's probably something that they never really ever did before. So now they can't distribute beer in Missouri until they take care of all these past filings, and the filings are all going to be 0, but Missouri wants them. So that is what is something that we always have to talk about. Who internally is taking care of these things?
That's actually part of the business plan too, right? Is who's your
Yeah.
operations person, who's responsible There's a bunch of idea people mostly, but who's going to execute, those back end operations that are necessary, like Diane said, and communicate with council.
Okay, okay. Any questions from the audience? You're very quiet today. Very quiet today. Okay, let's keep on going then. So we've gone over why you need a business plan. We've gone over how often you should look at. We've gone over the parts. Let's talk about that. We've talked that it's a living, breathing thing. Let's talk about emergencies. I don't think we have discussed about how to deal with emergencies on your business plan. What is the chain that you put in there? When you're developing one, Mike, your plan B that's built into the plan A. How do you look at these things outside of the SWOT?
Well, there's another concept we call it right person, right seat.
Okay, explain.
So, just as you're looking at your business plan, and let's go back to your point about planning for emergencies. Planning for emergencies often depends on whether you have the right person in the right seat to handle those emergencies. So as
Okay.
often as you and business continues to grow, well, actually, it's no straight line. Business is not a hockey stick. Projections are, but business is not a hockey stick. So business is kind of, a bit of a roller coaster, and emergencies happen all the time. However you define an emergency, some of your people get sick, or they quit, or so on and so forth. But all kinds of things happen with people, and then regulations and so on and so forth. So the question really comes down to how capable are you to handle the emergencies? And that often comes down to, do you have the right person in the right seat? And just because you've been in business for X number of years, and you've had a particular person who's played a role, an important role, and as the business continues to grow, you realize these emergencies are happening, and that person is no longer the right person in the right seat. So now you have to evaluate look at your people, look at what's going on, and really start determining whether those people that are particularly in those seats can get you to the next level. If so, you may have to do a lot of shuffling in terms of moving people around, or bring new people into the organization. So I don't know if I've answered your question directly, but I think, again, people really come to the fore, and that's the right person in the right seat.
So where does this come in? Does this come in as part of the business plan, or does it come in as part of the SWOT, or is this something completely different?
Well, it's another approach to the business. I'd say, well, let me put it this way. You have to have the business plan. You have to do the SWOT. You also have to continue to evaluate people. So I'd say it's another element that is important.
So Cole, where does this come in? How often do you do this with your business?
So I'm going to backtrack a second and point towards something that Michael had just mentioned. When you're putting your business plan together, you have your initial outlook of what your team is going to be, right? And who your director of operations is going to be, who your director of marketing is going to be. Fast forward 12 months or 14 months, 15 months, so on and so forth, you evaluate and say, okay, how are things going? How's the business doing? How's the team doing? And you might say, wow, they're not cutting it. I have to find better. Or, there's your initial outlook sometimes doesn't really plan out to be the way you want it to be, because you can only project your business plan is only projections. And putting people in place, you're hoping that they're going to get your projections to the finish line. But at the end of the day, you can't hold everyone's hand. And you have to make changes as your business evolves. You might have, in I'm going to use our business, one of our business, for example. Opened up a store with a team member that will move from New York, one of our locations, and from another manager from another location, and send them to Chicago to open up. And we hire a local director of marketing. After 6 months, 12 months, and constantly evaluating how the team's doing locally, you might realize that that director of marketing is not cutting it. But on paper, when you first opened up, you thought they were going to be the right person and for that job. But after evaluating and see the business in motion, you realize they're not the right person for your business. And it sets you back for a minute, because now you have to find that next person to replace them. But I think, like anything these days, it's constantly evolving. And
Well, it's important to make those hard decisions too. There's nothing worse than having the wrong person in the wrong seat, to Michael's point.
Yes.
And you think maybe just having a body is better than nobody, but it's really the right body is the only body, and nobody's sometimes better than a bad body.
And that's the other question, is how do you accomplish that in a tight labor market like this? This sounds great. How do you execute this? How do you find these people?
Well, sometimes you're better off cutting your losses and filling the voids with other people. It might be remotely, it might be saying I'm going to use social media for a second. We have a great social media girl in New York, and in Chicago, coming out of the pandemic, we couldn't find the right person for the job. So the girl in New York kind of overtakes it, and now it's under one roof until we find that right person. And it's back to the whole conversation of a whole of what we're talking about, is that coming out of the pandemic, everything is constantly evolving and changing and moving with the times. So I think that what might have worked, in 2019 or early 2020 might not work today. So you're constantly evolving to, depending what your business model is, what your brand is, what your concept is, you're evolving with the times. New York, as for an example, you might have been a concept that was incredible and you were focused on corporate lunches and after work. If you're in a certain part of town, you're dead, because the offices are empty. So like anything, it's constantly evolving.
And Fred, I think to answer the question too about how do you recruit, it goes back to the original topic of the conversation in terms of your business plan, your corporate culture, having a group that's, in leadership, that's the right leadership and foundation, having a plan, because no employee likes to sit there and, be a fire person, right? And it's constant fire drills, and they have no real leadership showing them where to go and what the goals are. It's unorganized, and no one really enjoys working in an unorganized environment or workplace.
On top of that, Fred, you spoke to me about this once, about in New York, having the person move over and do two jobs is sometimes illegal. We were talking about that, where a manager moves over and takes the responsibility of someone else at the same time, that the labor laws do not allow them to do that. Can you explain that and see what the panel has to say about it?
Yeah, and some of you guys can address it more than I can, but I know that there's specific law that says that a manager or an assistant manager can't do things like wait on tables, receive gratuities, et cetera. There's a whole clearly defined area of what you can do legally.
It can't be in the tip pool.
Right.
Yeah, you have to be careful when it comes to tips and pay and wages and posting of proper notifications and signage and the government entities come around, they inspect, they audit, and being compliant, like, checking in with people like Diane and myself and Michael, and ensuring compliance is extremely important.
So that actually brings up, you talked about advisors to a business. So an employment lawyer or some type of outside employment advice, whether it's an outside HR firm or et cetera. This is, this I think has become key for businesses in today's environment. There are so many changes in each state about employment law these days. And staying on top of that, particularly in the restaurant and hospitality industry, is absolutely critical. You cannot not have an employment lawyer to advise you. You cannot not have somebody who is well-versed in human resources advising you. You cannot not have somebody in the DEI. Help me out. DEI is
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
exactly. So these are like critical to businesses, just as it's critical to have a financial advisor, to have an accountant, et cetera. You've got to have people advising you on the employment side.
And it goes to, and I find my hospitality clients are less likely to have employee handbooks, which we encourage. But again, that's part of a business plan. It's employee handbooks, it's security plans. It's unfortunately, we're on one of our clients runs a big venue and we're doing an active shooter plan because of the, the change in, today's society and things that have happened. It's part of our emergency action plan is having those types of, manuals and training in place.
Yeah, it's changed. The world has changed. The business has changed dramatically. And I'm wondering whether it was due to COVID or it was just beginning to happen, but it certainly has happened in the last several years, amazingly.
Curious, anybody read the New York Times Sunday magazine, the story about the confrontations between restaurateurs and their customers? Anybody see that on Sunday?
No. Tell us about it, Fred.
I'll share it with everybody. But you wonder whether a more sophisticated customer base at all levels, including quick serve, has amped up the tension in getting from plan A to plan B, frankly, or from defining what plan A and plan B are.
Yeah, how do you stay efficient but still keep up customer service?
Right.
And it's a tug of war that is, never ending. It was never ending before. Now, when you're short two people, I mean, every single restaurant will tell you, I'm short two people. We've been hearing you're short two people since 2019.
Yeah.
And it's part of what we deal with. But, a lot of restaurants are trying to do it without being nice, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. We've come to the end of today's session. And first of all, I want to thank everyone who came and have sat through my technical and my mental disabilities today. And you guys on the panel, thanks for making me look smart. And I just can't thank you enough. But before we go, what I'd like to do, and Cole, you stay unmuted on this because you did add a lot to this. I want to go around the room, and whether it's about business plans or it's about anything that we touched on during this conversation, I want you to leave everybody with a last thought. So Diane, once again, why don't you start?
Well, during this conversation towards newer businesses, I would recommend seeking as much advice in a broad capacity as you can. As we mentioned, it's very important to have the right legal team, the right accounting team, the right bookkeeping team. Even if you're small, many of these things can be affordable. You need to be able to understand the advice and work on implementing a plan and the need to change the plan as time goes on.
Thank you, Diane. Joe?
Just some simple advice would be, don't be afraid to ask for help. kind of piggybacks on what Diane said is, accountants, attorneys, advisors, we're in the business of helping this thing. This is what we like to do. And there's no silly question. And if you're looking to, to organize and start a business, ask for help. There's so many resources out there, online, in person. And, that's my best advice. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Thank you, Joe. Mike.
Well, I don't know, I could wax on this a lot, but I would say that, a business is a living and breathing entity. It's constantly changing. And if you want to be successful, you have to be nimble enough to understand the changes and deal with it, both transactionally and strategic. And I think it's important to realize that business isn't all transaction and it isn't all strategy. It's a combination thereof. And a good business owner knows exactly what's going on in his business all the time.
Okay, thank you. Cole, the voice of the business owner.
Well, I think Diane and Michael and Joe hit a few really important parts. I think what is really important these days is having the right team, having the right personnel for opening up your vision, your store, and so on and so forth. I think what's also important is not underestimating what the true costs are these days, right? And what I mean by that is what something might have cost you in 2019 or early 2020 is not going to cost you the same now. Meaning a kitchen could have cost you in 2020 $100,000 to build. Today, cost you $230,000. So I think it's really important to really know what the true numbers are these days to make sure that your business plan is on point so that you're not opening up your concept or your business undercapitalized, because that you happen to find left and right where people open up undercapitalized and don't know where to go once the funds run out. So in short, make sure that you're properly funded, you cross all your T's and dot all your I's.
Okay, thank you. Fred.
I think my takeaway is you need to, as an operator, I think you need to vet as much of the technology that's out there, whether it's loyalty, scheduling, whatever, or what I mentioned to Larry, the robots that I saw last week at the trade show that actually handle the fryer, et cetera now. So I think you need to look at technology. You need to balance technology against what you want that customer experience to be. And maybe you take another look at the differences between what's going on in that $230,000 kitchen in the back of the house versus how you're operating the front of the house.
Okay, thank you. Well, my takeaways. Number one, I'm going to have 2 cups of coffee before the virtual breakfast session next week instead of 1, and I'm going to get a new internet service. So that being said, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. And the panel was great. I want to welcome you all to come back again 2 weeks from today. And this might be deja vu to some of the people that were here early, when we discuss catering and events. And it's not just chicken, beef, or fish. We're gonna have a good panel there discussing the new changes to menus and catering and events. And once again, I always say thanks for taking time to come see us in this morning. And just 2 more things. Everybody, stay positive, test negative.
Amen.
In 2 weeks. Thanks for coming.
See you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.